Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. As Scott said, I am Josie Barton. No, it's my fault. I'm really bad at knowing where I'm supposed to stand with these tape lines, so you'll have to forgive me, especially online, if I get out of place and a little out of focus here today. It's really good to be with you all in this room this morning. This is actually my first time back in person since March of 2020. So I'll probably cry at some point, just so you're all aware. But I'm also really excited that we get to connect and engage online. It's kind of cool that in the midst of all this craziness, that we're living in a time where this is possible, where we can engage in a way that works for us and remain in community in a way that works for us. I'm just excited that that's true of what we've been experiencing. So what I want to start with this morning is just making you the most popular person at your next trivia night. Okay, so here's some trivia to store away so that you can be the star of your team trivia night. Did you know that it took 1 year and 45 days to build the Empire State Building? It took 2 years, 2 months, and 5 days to build the Eiffel Tower. It took 4 years and 4.5 months to build the Golden Gate Bridge. And it took 22 years to build the Taj Mahal. Building takes a really long time, right? Anyone who's been through a construction project in their home kind of knows this. Like, how is it taking 3 months to get these cabinets put into my kitchen? I have no idea. It just seems like building can take forever. But if building takes a long time, if building takes a lot of effort, then rebuilding takes even more, doesn't it? Because when you're rebuilding, you're not starting from zero. You're starting from -10. Right? You have to clear the rubble. You have to salvage what can be salvaged. You have to scrap what needs to be scrapped. You've got to just clear the place before you can start the actual building. And in my opinion, rebuilding is much harder than building. That's true in life as well as in architecture, isn't it? It's really easy to fall in love with someone. 17-year-old Josie can tell you that, but it's much harder to restore love once it's been lost. It takes time and it takes effort to get someone to trust you, but it takes a lot more time and a lot more effort to get someone to trust you again after trust has been broken, right? Rebuilding takes an effort, not just a physical effort, but a spiritual and a mental effort as well. And in the past few weeks, Scott and others have done an incredible job, as always, of teaching us about what needs to happen or what needs to be present in order to rebuild well. And we've been following the story in Nehemiah, and after last week, we might think, well, hey, they did it, right? Chapter 6, verse 15, it took 52 days. The wall is rebuilt. That's awesome. But you might notice we're still here. We're still talking about Nehemiah today. The wall is finished in chapter 6, but there are 13 chapters in the book of Nehemiah. So what the heck are these other 7 chapters about? It's done. Well, the rest of the book of Nehemiah is proof to us that rebuilding is a journey. It's not a destination, right? Anytime there's rubble, anytime something has been destroyed, anytime something has been broken down, it just is going to take time to rebuild. And one of the things we need on that journey towards rebuilding, in addition to everything that we've heard in the past couple weeks, is a good memory. And I don't mean a good memory like you know what you had for breakfast on April 12th of 2014, right? I mean, we need to be willing to look back at our collective memory honestly and to learn from it. You've heard the phrase that those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it, right? Everyone's heard that. Well, our collective memory helps us to know our history so that these rebuilding efforts that we're putting time into now can last. So this term collective memory, simply put, it's just the memory of a group of people passed down from one generation to the next, right? So think about your family traditions, the funny story about your Uncle Joe that, only your family laughs at. That's kind of collective memory. Rebuilding requires us to remember what came before, but since we're finite, we have a start and an end point. We have to depend on collective memory to be able to know what came before us, right? To see where God has brought us. And we see Nehemiah and the Israelites drawing from their collective memory, the memory of the people of Israel, in chapters 7 and 8. The wall is complete, but rebuilding is not done. And in these chapters, we see 2 ways that collective memory, remembering things, can help us with rebuilding. And those ways are by giving us an honest assessment of the facts, and then by giving us an honest perspective on those facts. So let's talk about having an honest assessment of facts while we're rebuilding. In Nehemiah chapter 7, verses 1 through 4, and this is from the Message paraphrase, it says, "After the wall was rebuilt and I had installed the doors and the security guards, the singers, and the Levites were appointed, I put my brother Hanani, along with Hananiah, the captain of the citadel, in charge of Jerusalem, because he was an honest man and feared God more than most men. I gave him this order: don't open the gates of Jerusalem until the sun is up, and shut and bar the gates while the guards are still on duty. Appoint the guards from the citizens of Jerusalem and assign them to posts in front of their own homes." The city was large and spacious with only a few people in it, and the houses not yet rebuilt. I don't know about you, but if I were Nehemiah, I would very much want people to dishonestly assess how much work I had done. I'd want people to think that the work stood on its own, right? It was complete in and of itself. I would want to be lauded, and I would want to be praised and patted on the back, and I would want to be able to go my way knowing that I had started and finished something, and that was it. And what he did was incredible, of course, 52 days to rebuild the wall. But what we read in these verses is the opposite of that. Nehemiah instead remembers the truth. He remembers this story of Israel, the collective memory, the city that had been invaded, destroyed, an entire people sent into exile. And he realizes the work isn't done, and that's okay, right? He tells the leaders of the city, like, hey, we need to stay on guard. Just because the wall is rebuilt doesn't mean we're past this yet. Don't have the gates open for too long during the day, and don't move the guards away until they're shut, because we have to keep protecting this wall. The city's not full. The houses aren't even rebuilt. The work is not done. And he does the same in the rest of the chapter, in verses 5 through 73. It's a long chapter. And in those verses, we read a ton of information and numbers. And actually, what we're reading is a list that Nehemiah pulled from a record of Israel, right? It's part of their collective memory. And it's a list of all the people who have returned to Israel so far after the exile, and a list of everything that they've given for the work of rebuilding, like financial resources, you know? And the reason that he looks at that list is so that he can look at the facts honestly, so he can see what's before him. We have X number of people available to us. That's just what it is. We have X amount of resources available to us. This is what we have. And as Nehemiah looks at this list, we see a picture that in rebuilding, there's no use in wishing for more and longing for more and lamenting over the fact that we don't have what we want. By looking honestly at the facts, by facing them, by embracing them, we can say, this is what it is. We're called to rebuild, and this is what's at our disposal. There's a scene in The Office, of course, because I can't preach a sermon without mentioning The Office. There's a scene in The Office where Pam has quit her job at Dunder Mifflin to follow her doofus boss, Michael, into a new business venture called Michael Scott Paper Company. The first day of their startup goes terribly. Okay, they hire and lose the same employee. They get turned down for a loan by Michael's own grandma. It's such a good episode. Sorry. And they get a cease and desist from Michael's HOA saying if he continues to operate this business out of his home, he's going to get evicted. So after all this, we see Pam. She's just frozen in the front seat, the passenger seat of Michael's car. And he's walking away. He notices that she's not out of the car, so he comes back. And she looks at him with this panic in her eyes. And she goes, I can't do this. I had a real job. I sat 10 feet away from my fiance. I had health benefits. I was just feeling impulsive. And she kind of continues to freak out. And Michael eventually calmly replies to her, I want you to listen to me, because I want to tell you the situation we're both in right now, okay? You quit your job. I quit my job. We both quit. Those are the facts. That's what happened. Now, what are our choices right now? Because you know what, kiddo? You quit. So what are our options? That's what it means to honestly assess the facts, right? I know it's oversimplifying things. The Office is always oversimplifying things. And especially right now in our culture where there's a debate about what a fact even is, where every fact has some sort of value judgment ascribed to it, it can be really hard just to stop and take stock of what is at our disposal. But we have to know the facts if we want to rebuild anything. Facts like, hey, I've really hurt someone I loved. My relationship is in jeopardy, and this is going to be hard. Those are the facts. Facts like, I've been hurt by someone that I loved. I need space. I need time. I don't know if there's a way through this. Or facts like, hey, church doesn't feel safe to a lot of people right now. People are afraid. And they won't come if this or that or the other thing doesn't happen. We don't have to agree with them. We don't have to like them. We may super agree with them. It doesn't matter. Those are facts, right? Like Pam in the car, we have to be able to look at those things honestly, kind of stripped of their value judgments, to know what still needs to be done, to know what's available to us, and to know, okay, how do we move forward? Once we've done that, once we've honestly assessed the facts, then we can move on to the second thing that our collective memory can kind of help us with, and that's having an honest perspective on those facts. Did you know, another trivia fact for you, that incorrect eyewitness testimony was responsible for 69% of the nearly 375 overturned criminal convictions in the United States of America? 69%. Why is that? It's because, and this is a direct quote, although witnesses can often be very confident that their memory is accurate when identifying a suspect, the malleable nature of human memory and visual perception makes eyewitness testimony one of the most unreliable forms of evidence. As I was giving this to my husband last night, kind of going through, he was like, see, you don't always remember things. Now, I know we're not talking about suspect identification here, but we have to assume that if it holds true for eyewitness testimony, it's likely to be true in other areas of our life as well, right? We just can't remember correctly by ourselves. Because even if we're able to recall the details of an event, our interpretation of those details, our perspective on those details, they're probably going to be skewed if we try to interpret them alone. In Nehemiah chapter 8, we see collective memory done right, in my opinion, right? Everyone who's in Israel has gathered in Jerusalem to take part of a reading of the books of the law, right? These are the first 5 books in the Bible, our current Bible. It's the Jewish Torah, right? These books are full of things. They're full of regulations for best living, statistics, numbers, stories of how the Israelites became enslaved, stories of how the Israelites got out of slavery. I mean, it's a ton of history, a huge piece of their collective memory. They're realizing that even though the wall is built, right, it would be tempting to say, okay, we're done. The rebuild is done. They can't move forward without remembering how they got to where they are. If they're going to continue rebuilding, they have to know. So they invite Ezra the prophet to read all 5 of those books aloud. But we also read in verses 7 and 8, and forgive me because I will definitely not pronounce these names correctly, but Jeshua, Bani, Sherebiah, Jamin, Akub, Shabbathai, Hodiah, Messiah, Kalida, Azariah, Jozabad, Hanan, Peleah, all the Levites explained the books of the law while the people stood, listening respectfully. They translated the books of the law of God so that people could understand it, and then explained the reading. So here's what we see in that story. We need other people to be able to understand and remember the story correctly. Just listening to it's not enough, right? If we're going to rebuild and remember, we have to do that with other people alongside of us. And we have to be willing to hear their perspective on the facts. My brother is a really good songwriter, again, in my opinion, very poetic. And a few weeks ago, I texted him about this song he wrote. It's called Josephine Tries. And I told him that my son Branch loves the song. My son Branch loves nothing. So this is like a really big deal. And my brother texted me back and said, that's great. Tell him that it's about his mom. And I responded to my brother, me? It's not about me. I thought it was about our mom. We share a name. Her name is Josephine too. And he said, it's about both of you. The second verse is about that time you made the meringue doves. And the time I made the meringue doves was in 2012. I was newly married. I was still chasing after this dream of being a domestic goddess, which I have since given up. And I really wanted to carry on this tradition that my mom had of making meringue turtle doves as part of her like Christmas cookie, whatever agenda. And I had never made meringue before. but I tried to make them, and it was just a miserable failure. It was really, really bad. Like, I couldn't even scrape them off the pan. I think we had to trash the pans. It did not go well. So with that in mind, I thought, okay, what on earth did my brother write about this instance? And I'm going to just read it to you again. It's very poetic. He has the soul of an artist, but it says, all the meringue dissolved in the pan. It takes care to get it right. It took Josephine some tries. Well, she thought it worth the time. She brought the good to life. What I think of that night, when I think of those meringue doves, I don't think of any of that, right? I think abject failure. I think of not being who I wanted to be, of not being able to reach these standards that I had set for myself. But when my brother saw the same exact thing, he saw persistence, he saw tradition, and for him, those things ultimately meant some measure of success, right? And that's why we need other people. Because the facts that the meringue did not turn out well, they were inedible, can be interpreted in so many ways. And if we aren't careful, if we live in an echo chamber or we're only listening to ourselves, we can interpret things in ways that are inconsistent with rebuilding, that are inconsistent with recreating and restarting. We have to have other people to help us look at things another way. And that's true even in situations where we don't agree with someone else's assessment or perspective. I don't have this in here, so I apologize if it's a little bit messy, but sometime last year, Katie Hubbard and I sat down on a bench outside of Ice Queens, and we had a really hard conversation because I was looking at something one way and she was looking at something another way. And that conversation was pivotal for me in thinking about it's how we engage people online, basically, when we disagree with them, in thinking of that in a totally different way. If I had just kept to myself and been like, no, we're not going to have this conversation, which I was tempted to do at different points, I would still be stuck in my one way of thinking. Nothing would have changed, right? But because I was able to sit down, hear a different perspective, it didn't change my opinion, but it helped me look at things in a different way. We need that. We have to have that if we want to rebuild well. In Jeremiah, we read that the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. That means that we can't trust our own emotions, right? They're terrible guides and they're terrible gods. We see in God himself a relationship, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. In Genesis, God says it's not good for Adam to be alone, and so he creates Eve. And Jesus, in his own time on earth, gathers 12 disciples around him. We just need other people. We need to listen to other people. Without one another, we're never really going to be able to understand and remember the amazing things that God has done for us individually and as a group. And if we can't understand, if we can't remember, then we can't rebuild. Not anything, right? We can't rebuild rhythms in going to church. We can't rebuild a relationship. We can't rebuild our sobriety. Nothing. We need each other. So what does that mean for us as we go from here today? Well, a couple of things. If honest assessment of the facts and an honest perspective of the facts are part of what we need to rebuild, then we need to get the facts and we need to get a perspective, right? So I just tried to think about, all right, how do we get those things? The first way that we can get facts is through Scripture, right? We have to get the facts straight from Jesus. The Bible is truth. Of course, there are a lot of ways to interpret it, and that's why we need one another. But we have to start with Jesus himself. We have to start with the text itself, right? And then we take it to other people. We interpret it. If you're not a follower of Jesus, you're not really sure what the Bible says, or you've only heard it from other Christians, I encourage you to start in the Gospels, particularly the book of John, because then you really get to see who Jesus was and what he was about. The second way that we get the facts is just by keeping a record. Like Nehemiah was able to look at who he had available to him and what resources he had because someone had written it down. Now, we're not all writers, obviously, but writing, drawing, crocheting, vlogging, whatever it is, we have to have some sort of record so that the people who come after us know how God was faithful. And so a next step this week is just start keeping a record, right, in whatever way seems best or works best for you. And lastly, we need to get the facts through honest relationship. I'm really blessed to have two super good friends who I disagree with fundamentally on almost everything, who really help me to see different perspectives, right? To get perspective on the facts. But I know that that's kind of a hard thing to say in this season that we're coming out of, where it feels like community has been broken, where relationships have broken down. We've been so far away from other people. It's all well and good to say, get perspective from your friends. But I just want to encourage you, if you feel like you're in a place where I don't even know who I would go to, I don't even know where I would start to get perspective. Scott, Austin, Lindsay, Chelsea, Katie, all the people who work here, all the people sitting in this room, myself, we would love to be a part of that for you. Just reach out. That's the first step, right? And if you're not comfortable with that, or you're not, in the room, you're watching from somewhere else, we encourage you to seek counsel, right? We're all for mental health and getting outside perspective through counselors here. So those are just some ways that you can get an honest perspective on the facts. Because if we really want to rebuild, we just have to remember, right? That's what we see in Nehemiah. First, through an honest assessment of the facts, this is what it is. And then through an honest perspective on those facts, letting other people speak in. And when we do both of those things together, when we see how far God has brought us, it leads us to celebration. In Nehemiah chapter 8, we read this. Nehemiah the governor, along with Ezra the priest and scholar and the Levites who were teaching the people, said to all the people, "This day is holy to God, your God. Don't weep and carry on." And they said this because all the people were weeping as they heard the words of the books of the law. He continued, "Go home, prepare a feast, holiday food and drink, and share it with those who don't have anything. This day is holy to God. Don't feel bad. The joy of God is our strength." So the Levites calmed the people, "Quiet now. This is a holy day. Don't be upset." So the people went off to feast, eating and drinking and including the poor in a great celebration. Now they got it. They understood the reading that had been given to them. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a time to mourn, right? There's a time to repent. Katie did an awesome job this morning of guiding us through that. And man, have we lamented and mourned in the past 18 months, right? In fact, in the last verse of chapter 8, all of this kind of ends with a solemn assembly. They give up the celebration and they get back to that mourning. But that only happens after a full week of celebration. And that's because when we remember what God has done for all of us and for us individually, how far he's brought us, joy will follow. When we celebrate communion together, it's an act of collective remembrance and celebration. It's a remembrance of Jesus' perfect life, of his selfless sacrifice for us on the cross, and of his victorious resurrection. It's making all things new. And even though when we celebrate communion here, it's not loud and raucous, right? It is a celebration still of what he's done for us, what he did for us, what he's going to do for us. His sacrifice, his blood, those things rebuild us. They restore us and they resurrect us. And like Nehemiah says, it gives us joy. The joy of the Lord is our strength. So I'm going to pray. When you walked in, you may have gotten one of those little cup bread combos. If you didn't, they're in the back and you can get one now. And after we pray, we're just going to invite you to partake in communion. Take the bread and remember that Jesus died and rose again. Drink the juice and remember his blood shed. Let's rejoice and remember by taking communion together.